Hello, and welcome to another wonderful episode of That's Good, Pick It Up, a podcast mostly about golf books. I'm your host, Nate Oxman, and for the next few weeks, we'll spend some time with author Larry Baush, a longtime golf writer who wrote a book about one of the most colorful characters in the history of the PGA Tour, Tony Lema. The book is called Uncorked, The Life and Times of Champagne Tony Lema, and throughout our time together, Larry will discuss his background in writing, why he chose to write Lema's biography, and after that, Larry will take us through Lema's fascinating life in golf, a life that tragically came to an end when he was only 32 years old. As always, thanks to our producer, Robbie Woodard, and the BestBall Podcast Network for getting this out to all of you. You can learn more about the fast-growing BestBall golf community, known as BestBall Golf Club, as well as BestBall's other podcasts by visiting bestball.com. Let's get to this week's episode, which is part one with Larry Baush and his book Uncorked, The Life and Times of Champagne Tony Lema. That's good. Pick it up. Welcome to That's Good, Pick It Up. Today we're talking to Larry Baush and his book Uncorked, The Life and Times of Champagne Tony Lema, about the great Tony Lema, PGA Tour great, who should be, as you'll hear, in the World Golf Hall of Fame. Larry, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Nate. It's good to be with you on That's Good, Pick It Up.
Can you talk to us a little bit about your background in writing and kind of what led you to wanting to write this book about Tony Lema?
Okay, I studied journalism in school, and I put that to work by publishing a magazine back in the early days of desktop publishing on the craft brew industry. I did that from 1985 to 1995. So that was during the pioneer days of the craft brew industry. Had a lot of fun doing that. I had a column called Working for a Living, where I would go work in one of the craft breweries for a day and then write about it. I got to go to Europe on somebody else's tab to drink and visit breweries about 5 times. Led a group of beer enthusiasts through Central Europe 3 times. The first time we went through Central Europe was in 91. So we were the first Americans to visit the Pilsner Urquell brewery since World War II. We were the first, same at the Budvar brewery. They were so excited to have Americans. They just roll the red carpet out, and there's nothing like drinking. It's like Guinness in country. There's nothing like drinking Pilsner Urquell or Budvar in country where it's not pasteurized. It's just delicious. After about 10 years, I felt like I had the world's largest paper route. I wrote 90% of it myself. I sold all the ads. I collected on all the ads. It's the other thing. I felt like I had a collection agency too. Yeah. So after 10 years, I was kind of burned out on that. Went into sales and then ended up at a golf retailer here in Seattle, Putz Golf. In the winter, the retail stores for golf are kind of dead, so they cut back hours for everybody. And I had a lot of free time, and I said, well, I'd like to get back into writing. So I thought about what I would write about, and I always wanted to do a book. And so the first rule of writing is write about what you love. So I landed on Tony Lema because I was such a fan of his when I was a kid. Come from a competitive family, and we competed on everything. And so my mom liked Arnold Palmer, so my dad had to go with Jack Nicklaus. And I thought I better find somebody different. And I just thought Tony Lema was so cool, tall, elegant. He dressed like Hogan dressed, only in a different era, but it was like head and shoulders above the other guys that were out there, you know. So he had a book that he co-wrote with a Sports Illustrated writer, which was kind of a thing that was in vogue back in the middle 60s. Jerry Kramer with his book, Run to Daylight, Jim Bouton with his book, Ball 4. So Tony's was kind of like that. It was kind of a travel log for the year that preceded him becoming a superstar. So that would be up to 1963 in his career. And it just had some of the greatest stories in it. I read it a million times. My family was really competitive. My mom, her favorite player was Arnold Palmer. My dad's favorite player was Jack Nicklaus. So I had to find somebody else, so I could have my own. And I just thought Tony Lema was so cool. So I dove into the project, and I didn't know how much fun it would be. One of the first interviews I did was with his oldest brother and his wife, who was kind of the family historian, and it was like going out to the gold rush and hitting the mother vein
Yeah.
on one of the first swings of your axe. So that was really nice.
Um, how long did the project take from start to finish?
It was kind of a side project for me, so it took about 10 years from start to finish.
Wow.
Yeah.
Um, was there a time during that stretch where you were like, I don't know if I'm gonna get this done?
Daily. uh But the thing about writing is if you just keep plugging along, you kind of see the end of the tunnel
Yeah.
eventually, and you just build up a certain amount of momentum that gets you to that end of the tunnel. And that happened to me. I'm kind of going through the same process now because we're making the movie into a documentary film,
Wow.
and we started on that. I can still remember we were driving up for one of the first interviews, and it was when the framework between Live and the PGA was first announced. So that would be like in June of 23.
Wow.
And we're at the point now in the movie where we've got about 2 hours of runtime. So we're at the point now where we start culling it down because we want it to be between 60 and 90 minutes. And so it's coming along, but it's just like the book. It's like we can see the end of the tunnel now. We're trying to get there. It would be nice to have the movie done next year in 2026 because that would be the 60th anniversary of Tony's demise in the plane crash.
Was it hard to get that project off the ground, the documentary?
Yeah, but again, I got pretty lucky. I was contacted by a producer out of LA, and right around the same time, we learned of a production company in the East Bay who was interested in making a documentary on Tony Lema, and we just almost serendipitously connected all three of our points together. And from that point, we embarked on interviewing every living player that we could think of that had some sort of tie to Tony. And we got Jack Nicklaus, we got Gary Player, Bobby Nichols, and then some of the journeyman pros too, like Butch Baird. He was one of the best interviews.
Hmm.
Um, and we'll probably go into Tony's relationship with a really cool character in golf, Lucius Bateman, who was a teacher in the Bay Area, and very interesting story. And we interviewed most of the living Bateman boys is what they call themselves in the Bay Area. They're guys that are now retired head pros, retired teaching professionals, um, and they still call themselves Bateman boys. And I've gotten very involved with the Lucius Bateman Foundation and playing their golf tournament every year. But
Oh, cool.
it's a really interesting story, and it's also one that could stand alone as a feature film. And so we're hoping that the documentary will spur enough interest in him that we can find somebody that would like to move forward on a film about Lucius Bateman.
That'd be really cool.
Yeah.
Are you connected with this PGA professional Jay Golden who's was trying to get Tony Lema into the Hall of Fame?
I have met Jay Golden. I met him at the PGA show last January. I hooked him up with Tony Lema's nephew, uh, and we've talked about the best ways to get Tony. His whole goal is to get Tony Lema into the World Golf Hall of Fame, which is another one of the inspirations for me
Yeah.
in writing the book too. So, yep. So I know Jay. He's
Okay.
funny guy.
Is he?
Yeah. He actually has done a number of stand-up routines based on golf.
Really?
And he got interested in Tony Lema because he was attending an event, and Tony came over to the rope and was talking to the crowd right where he was standing and addressed him and himself. So yeah,
Oh,
Jay is a character.
Very cool. Can you tell us about Tony's childhood and his, intro to golf?
Sure. Tony's father passed away from pneumonia. He was working on a WPA crew digging ditches. Tony was 3 years old, so he had no memory of his father. And the story of Tony Lema is kind of one where he is continually searching for uh, surrogate fathers or
yeah.
father figures. Um, so his mother, who was just a saint, uh, Cleo, they called her. Her real name was Clotilda. She worked a couple of jobs to keep food on the table for 4 kids. Tony was the youngest. He had an older sister and 2 older brothers. And so Tony and his older brother that was closest in age to him, Walter, spent a lot of time together. Walter found a caddy job up at Lake Chabot, which is up the hill, up in the Oakland Hills. And Tony learned that he could make a few extra bucks caddying, so he tagged along one time and began caddying. Caddied for a gentleman named Ed McCaffrey, who owned a retail golf store in San Francisco. And Tony was very athletic. He was really, really good at basketball, and he just started mimicking the golf swings. And he got into golf through caddying, which if you didn't get involved in golf being introduced by your father, you got into golf being introduced by caddying.
Um,
He had really good hand-eye coordination and took to the game really well. And that's about in his mid-teens is when Bateman gave him some more instruction and fine-tuned his swing. And he just improved from there and um, started playing in local tournaments and the local amateur tournaments in the Bay Area. As Ken Venturi said, he would put up the amateurs from the Bay Area against any region in the country.
Yeah.
They were usually match play. They were usually played on 2 weekends. You would qualify, then play your matches the first weekend and come back. If you had won your matches, come back the next weekend for the semifinals and the final matches. And Tony just kind of took to competitive golf because of the instruction that Lucius Bateman gave him. Lucius Bateman was just as important in teaching the mental part of the game, golf swing. In fact, Lucius had his principles of the golf swing, but he never tried to change what you did naturally when you came in for a lesson or to learn the game. He liked a real short backswing, not much leg movement. But Tony came in, had a big backswing, and later on, working alongside Ken Venturi, when Byron Nelson would come out to the Bay Area every year and give Venturi lessons, um, he learned the leg movement of Byron Nelson, and he had this nice, lovely, long, languid swing with lots of power generated by the leg action that he learned from Nelson via Venturi.
how did that relationship with Ken Venturi develop? Was it through Bateman?
No, they were actually in a little bit different ages. So when they were both playing junior golf, Ken Venturi would be in a age division, the next age division up because he was a little bit older. They actually got tight when Nelson started coming out. And Nelson came out to the Bay Area because he was a good friend of Eddie Lowry, who was the
Yep.
caddy for Francis Ouimet, had a big car dealership in the Bay Area, and Nelson would come out every year and buy a new Cadillac. And then he would hang around and play golf with Lowry at San Francisco Golf Club and the Cal Club. Well, it just so happens that after a stint in the Marines that Tony was sort of uh, advised very strongly by a police chief during his rebellious teenage years that it would be a good idea to enlist because the next time he saw him, he would put him in jail.
Yeah.
And Tony got out of the Marines and actually learned that job from a motorcycle cop who pulled him over, and and it was an old golfing buddy or a fellow competitor from his junior days. Told him about the job up at San Francisco Golf Club, which he got, and that's where Nelson and Venturi would meet for their lessons. And Venturi would come in after the lesson into the golf shop, and he'd haul Tony out to the range, and he would, as Venturi described it to me, he would give Tony the exact same lesson that Byron Nelson had just given him as a way to kind of imprint it on his own brain. So that's where they became really close, and it was a friendship that lasted the rest of Tony's life and Ken's life.
Yeah, very cool. I loved reading about his childhood, and how quickly he took to golf, and um, then about the fact that Nelson taught Venturi, and Venturi took those ideas and taught them again to Tony Lema, which is pretty amazing. Um, can you tell the story? Yeah, yeah.
Here we go. I just gotta.
Go ahead.
Okay, you can hear me again.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, that's better. Sorry.
Can
Go
you?
ahead.
I'm hoping my notes are correct in this, from what I read. Can you tell the story about his first win, which I wrote down? He was drunk in the playoff after having 3 scotch and waters. Is that correct?
Yeah, this was an interesting that he was even playing in the event. So after a couple of years at the San Francisco Golf Club as an assistant, he heard about a head pro job at a new 9-hole course in Elko, Nevada called Ruby View. So he took that job and he wanted to take about a 7-week vacation and go play on the fall swing of the PGA Tour. And he went to Eddie Lowry, who gave him $700 loan, and he went out and he played in 6 or 7 tournaments, and one was a Tijuana Open. There was another one that was in Southern California late in the year. It could even been the Orange County Open. But one of the last tournaments that he played in was at Barbara Worth, in right near the Mexican border in the central part of California, and he uh, he played well his round and looked at the scoreboard, figured that he was going to have a nice high finish. He'd be able to pay Eddie Lowry back his loan and put some money in his pocket, and he went to the bar. Would like to have a few cocktails during this stage in his life, and he had made quite a few friends at the Barbara Worth 19th hole, because he was such a rabbit. He wasn't playing in the Pro-Am. He couldn't play practice rounds, and so he just sat around the bar and drank with the other players that were of the same status. So he's in there having a couple of scotch and sodas. He's just been and says that Paul Harney has to make this medium length putt to tie him. He pushes the scotch and soda away and goes out and just in time to see Harney make the putt. So he's in a sudden death playoff, and they show up on the first tee, and the PGA official asks if they want to split the prize money and just play for the trophy, which was kind of common back in that era. And Harney immediately agrees to it, and Tony doesn't. And the PGA official says, "Well, who the hell do you think you are?" Tony shoots right back that I'm the player in this playoff. Whether the drinks gave him a feeling of confidence or he just tapped into what Lucius Bateman taught him, he went out and on the second, I think it was the second hole, had to hit this big shot around a group of trees. It's a dogleg right. He had pushed his drive a little bit too far right. Has to hit this big slice around the trees, and that means putting it out over the water. And it was like a shot that if you don't pull it off, everybody's going to ask you, what are you thinking? Well, he pulled it off, and he pulled it off pretty much to perfection. And it kind of shook Harney up, and Harney missed his approach from the fairway with a much better angle. Tony was able to win the playoff, and he won his. I'd like to say it was his first PGA Tour event, but this tournament was so small that it was kind of an unofficial event. It's kind of the same thing was what they're doing in the fall now on the PGA Tour. It's an official, except that it's an official event. You don't get all the perks you get for winning last week's tournament,
Right.
RSM, that you do during the regular season. So there's no Masters invite and that kind of thing. So it wasn't really an official tournament. But it paid a couple $1,000s, which, Tony said that in Golfer's Gold, he wrote that he wanted to just call up Ruby View and and resign on the spot and go hit the tour, but he didn't. He reported for duty at Ruby View.
And that time at Ruby View was interesting, right? He became friends with Bing Crosby, who had a ranch nearby or something.
Yeah, he became ranch was right next door to the golf course.
Okay.
Bing spent time there and they got acquainted, but who Tony really fell in with was Bing's two sons from his first marriage. And these two guys were the three of them were kind of the three amigos, and they would play golf during the day, and then they would go to the casinos in town. There were a couple of casinos. Elko at that time was the casinos and the whorehouses.
Yeah.
Outnumbered the other businesses probably 2-1. And Tony and the Crosby boys spent time in both.
And then he became, a big gambler. I think I read in the book that he lost $25,000 in a day once. Was there do you think like when he realized that he had to get out of there or his life was going to go kind of down in the toilet?
Yeah, there's two things that running up debts at the casinos. One of the owners of one of the most guys, he took to Tony right away and they became friends. And so this owner let Tony run up some substantial debts at the casino. But the other thing that happened was as a head pro in Elko, he was playing in sectional events, PGA sectional events around Idaho and northern Nevada. And he met a fellow pro, Cliff Whittle, who was friends with a guy named Jim Malarkey, who was a trust fund baby out of Portland and spent most of his time in Sun Valley. And Malarkey would accompany Whittle and Lema to the different tournaments, mostly state opens and sectional events. And Whittle had a pilot's license, so he flew him there in his little small plane. Well, they were sitting around in the motel after one of these tournaments, and they were passing the bottle around and drinking. And Whittle said to Malarkey, "Why don't you sponsor Tony and put him out on the tour?" And Malarkey without missing a beat, said, "I'll do it." Tony thought it was the liquor speaking, but the next morning they talked about it some more and decided that they would that they would do that and start the next year. Um, or they would play a few events in the fall tour. So it'd be kind of like his little vacation that he had before he went to Ruby View. So they were going to meet up in Sun Valley at, at Whittle's golf course while Whittle shut it down for the winter, and then they were going to fly to Southern California. Well, Whittle was taking a little bit longer to close the shop than Tony and Malarkey had patience for. So they said, "Listen, we're going to fly to Las Vegas. You come down, you meet us there." A couple days later, Tony calls Whittle and says that they've lost their entire $25,000 drum stake for the PGA Tour, and that Malarkey had headed back to Portland to talk to his mother and get some more money, and Whittle should join Tony in Elko, and then they would leave from there. So that's how he lost his $25,000 in a day. Was hanging around with a guy that had a lot more money than him and was a lot more not risk averse, because Tony would take lots of risks, but losing that money wouldn't hurt Malarkey as much as it would hurt Lema. And in the end, it didn't really hurt Lema because it wasn't his money that was lost.
Right.
And Malarkey did find money and did put him out on the tour, and was his sponsor, which leads into a whole bunch of other stories once he's out there on the tour.
And Tony struggled early on tour. You know, he had those kind of crazy off course lifestyle, right? He had a black book of girlfriends, and I read there was a classification or a categorization of women that he had that he shared in Golfer's Gold. So he wasn't afraid to talk about it, right? But kind of that kind of freewheeling lifestyle hurt him early on in his tour career until Dal Finsterwald had an intervention with him.
Well, Dow had an intervention with him. Arnold Palmer had an intervention with him. The Aber brothers sat him down and had a talking to with him. He actually had a really successful freshman year out on the tour, but it was his second and third year. He's like a lot of players, especially young players going out on tour. After a successful first year, he decided there were a few tweaks that he was going to make in his setup and swing that he thought would make him even more successful, and they almost ruined him. Like anybody that goes through
Yeah.
a swing change, it can be disastrous sometimes. And as he struggled, he got deeper and deeper into a hole. Um, he, I would label it a mild case of depression. He got to the point where he hated going to the golf course.
Wow.
One of the things and it gets back to his nocturnal habits. He he did love to go out at night. He loved to dance. He loved to have a attractive woman on his arm. And like you said, you mentioned the black books. When I interviewed his brother, Walter, Walter said he actually had about 3 black books. But he clawed his way out of the depths of his slump. And in golf, it's so weird. You can get in a slump that'll last 2 weeks. You can get in a slump that'll last 2 years, and you get into one of those that stretches over that length of time, and it really starts to play with your mind. So he clawed his way out of that slump, and what really turned his career around was meeting and falling in love with Betty Klein, who was a flight attendant. They called them stewardesses back then.
Yeah.
But they met on a flight from Dallas to the Bay Area, and they started dating. And it wasn't long before Tony realized he was falling in love with her, and she really had a stabilizing effect on not only his career but his life.
I enjoyed reading about you mentioned that, Palmer helped him too and some other guys, and you talked about how Horton Smith helped him with his putting and, talked to him about managing his emotions and controlling his anger. I think there was a story earlier about how he broke a driver in Sun Valley, when he was kind of maybe at the peak of his frustrations during his sophomore slump, right?
Yeah, but that was not out of anger. It was he was putting on a show for the ski instructors.
Okay.
The first hole at the course at Sun Valley is drivable for somebody of Tony's length, and so they kept urging him, let's go, we could drive this green, and he'd come close, and he had just beat so many balls with a persimmon driver at a cold temperature that the wood cracked. But it was a driver that he was very attached to, and didn't help because, like you said, he was still in his slump. If you take away a professional's driver, uh, almost a marital relationship with him, and it's
Yeah.
really hard to replace him. So he went through some struggles just replacing that driver.
And then he won for the first time in Mexico, which was at toward the end of 61, I think, and it gave him, confidence into 62.
Yes. Yeah, the Mexican Open, again, an unofficial event, but it was held at the time of year where it attracted a lot of players from the PGA Tour. And actually, the Mexican Open uh, it was a pretty prestigious tournament through
Yeah.
the 70s. Up until the mid '80s. I mean, it had winners like Ben Crenshaw, Orville Moody. Tony won it twice. Palmer played in it. I think he might have won it. But it was an important tournament, and again, it got Tony on the winning path. Um, there's nothing that breeds winning more than winning,
Yeah.
that helped. That helped
Right.
him get started.
And then 62, he was, I think, called the hottest player on tour. He was playing well in the fall and feeling good about his game, but he was a little frustrated that he hadn't had that official win yet, um, until he beat Bob Rosberg, in Orange County, right? And I don't know if you want to tell that story now about, was it the fans that he ran into or Bob Rosberg himself later? That story you told near the end in the epilogue?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, he got to Orange County after winning the Sahara Invitational, which again was not an official event because it was a pro-am. Later, the PGA Tour retroactively declared it an official event, so it's kind of it which is helpful to get Tony in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
It adds to his total of official wins. So after doing that, his hot streak in 1962 actually started up here in Seattle at the Seattle Open, where
Oh, cool.
he battled Jack Nicklaus at Broadmoor Country Club, and was in it to the last day till about the 17th or 18th hole, and he finished in the top three there. Went down and played okay in Portland the next week, and then wins in Sierra at in Vegas, and then goes to Orange County. And in Orange County, he's playing, it was either the first or second round with Bob Rosberg. And he said, he told Rosberg, they're both from the Bay Area, so they knew each other. And he says, Rossi, if I don't win one pretty soon, I'm gonna take this club job that he had been offered in the Bay Area. Well, he's in contention. He and Rossi tie after regulation, and it's a sudden death playoff. Back then, sometimes there were sudden death playoffs. If it was a more prestigious tournament, it was an 18-hole playoff.
Yeah.
This one was a sudden death playoff. First hole, Rosberg hits one right down the middle with his patented fade, and Tony hits this big hook that looks like it's headed for out of bounds. And so he hits a provisional. The two players walk up, and they're kind of surprised to see the ball is about a foot in bounds. Tony chips out, gets up on the green, manages to tie Rosberg on that hole, and then wins it on the next hole, making a long putt. And then that's the famous, before the last round when he was leading, he was in the press room, which was really the card room off of the men's locker room because this was so late in the year. Most of the sports writers were covering football. And he got to the end of the interview and he said, "Well, boys, if I'm in here tomorrow, we're not going to be drinking beer." There was a cooler of beer there, and he had one in his hand. He holds up the bottle. He says, "We're not going to be drinking beer in here tomorrow. We're going to be drinking champagne." So after he wins, they go back to the course, and sure enough, there's a case of champagne that gets delivered to this little card room, and Tony treats the press to champagne. Well, I later learned after writing the book that the reason that there was champagne there was Bob McAllister, a fellow pro, was sponsored on the tour by Lawrence Welk. And Lawrence Welk is the guy who came up with the idea. He said, if you ever win a tournament, what you want to do is give the press champagne. Well, Bob McAllister and Tony were pretty good friends, and McAllister got wind of what he had said the day before about having champagne, and so he made the case of champagne that was on site because McAllister was also in contention. He made that available to Tony, and Tony then shared it with the press. Became known as either the Champagne Kid or Champagne Tony upon after that win, as all those writers that were there dubbed him. And Doc Giffen, who was later Arnold Palmer's manager, not manager, but actually secretary, and would take care of everything for Palmer. He was actually the secretary of the PGA Tour at that time, and he saw the value in promoting that nickname for Tony, and he got it out there in the press, and Tony became known as Champagne Tony. Even had a clothing line with a little champagne glass on the chest, and it was really a trademark of his.
That's it for part one of our discussion with Larry Baush and his book, Uncorked, The Life and Times of Champagne Tony Lema. If you like what you hear from Larry, I would really, really recommend you check out his Tour Backspin newsletter. You can visit tourbackspin.com, or you can go to Substack and search his name, Larry Baush, B-A-U-S-H, to find out more about what he does. He does some deep dives into the history of the PGA Tour, some really interesting subject matter. Just briefly looking through his Substack, which I'm a subscriber of, I found awesome articles on the first Hawaiian to win on the PGA Tour, the 1980 J.C. Penney Classic, and most recently, the email that I receive weekly alerting me to a new edition of Tour Backspin had the subject, Nicholas Stalks a Buffalo. Larry's an awesome researcher, he's a great writer, and I think you'll really enjoy what he does at Tour Backspin if you love the history of the PGA Tour. Don't forget to download, rate, review, subscribe to this podcast, share it with others. If you're looking for a great book for a 10 to 16-year-old kid who's looking to get into golf or who already loves golf, please go to Amazon, search The Philly Phenoms or my name, Nate Oxman, and take a look at the middle grade sports fiction novel I wrote about 10-year-old Lee Lomax as he begins his golf journey called The Philly Phenoms. Thanks again to Robbie Woodard and BestBall for producing this podcast. We'll be back next week with more of our discussion with Larry Baush and his book, Uncorked, The Life and Times of Champagne Tony Lema. That's good. Pick it up.